Dr. McGrew, thank you so much for joining us today.
It is my great pleasure.
You were president in 2003. What are your memories of the challenges at that time?
Well, it was an interesting year in numerous respects. I recently went back and looked at my letters from the president that I'd written in the quarterly during that time, and there was still a lot of division tension that existed in the academy at that time. And I guess since I'm a little more separated from the active leadership, I don't know how much of that exists anymore, but there was still a lot of discussion about whether palliative medicine and hospice belonged in different settings, and I think that we squelched most of that. Most of the leadership, I think, became pretty convinced that the tensions that were there could have positive notes to them, and that we needed to work off each other's strengths and appreciate the differences, as opposed to think differences meant we needed to be in different places. So the commonalities exceeded the differences. The other thing that was happening that year was the PDIA grant under who was that under? It was under
Kathy Foley.
Yeah, well, Kathy Foley was one of the directors of it. But anyhow, the funding was getting cut off, and they were looking for a permanent home for the PDIA.
Right.
And so Jim Cleary, who was the president-elect, and I went and met with them and got the grant funding, the balance of the grant funding passed on to the academy, and then we became the home of the PDIA. So we had all those things to set up going forward, and Jim and I worked together on that. There were a couple things that I really engaged him a lot, because there was this transitional stuff that was going on, and things that were getting started during my presidency that were going to continue into his, which I guess is always the case, but I didn't see all the presidents working as closely. We did a lot of traveling together that year.
I bet.
The other thing that happened during my year of presidency was it was the year that the board made the formal decision to go for subspecialty status instead of specialty status for hospice. You know, we had our discussions with ABMS and the Board of Internal Medicine and Family Practice, and found out that we had appreciable support for subspecialty status, but we had appreciable opposition for anything else. And so, you know, as much as we would have loved for it to be different, we decided that the practical thing to do was to go for a subspecialty position. And having done that, then we recognized what is now being truly experienced is that once we got past the grandfathering phase, that there was going to be only a trickle of new trained hospice and palliative medicine physicians because of the limited fellowship positions. And with, I don't know what the numbers are now, but say 4,000 palliative care programs and 4,000 hospices, you've got a lot of need for
200 palliative care programs and 4,000 hospices. Yeah. You foresaw the present dilemma.
So we started the hospice medical director's course. That's when that got started. We did all the outlining. I guess maybe the first production of it occurred the following year. And recognized also that there would ultimately need to be a medical director certification of some sort beyond, you know, that would be separate from the board certification. And it took longer than I would have thought or hoped, but now we're actively engaged in that process. So I sit on the board for the hospice medical director certification, and hopefully next year we'll have our first exam.
Well, that's certainly one major challenge we have overcome since then. Have you seen, from your point of view, are there other things that we've done?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a maturing that's going on in the academy, and obviously we're getting more engaged, more connected to the big boys, so to speak, for the good and the bad of that, because it's not all good. But I think to have a seat at the table and a voice in medicine is somewhat necessary. And I think a major issue was achieving the board status, because that gave legitimacy to what we did in a way that the practice itself wasn't doing. So I think that's been a major thing, and now, of course, I'm not as actively involved in what's happening at the academy. I don't really know all the dynamics that happen internally like you would, but it seems like we're, growing at a healthy pace. There's not, we're not seeing leaps and bounds of growth, but we've pretty well saturated the industry in many respects, and we're looking at the ways to actually engage in the portions that we've not engaged. And I'm hoping that the hospice medical director certification will help to extend that reach, particularly in the hospice world. I know that there's still many part-time hospice medical directors who've never been to a academy meeting and are not academy members. And by virtue of that, not that that's the only way you could learn proficiency in skills in hospice, but it's certainly a major way too. And
Yeah.
so I'm hoping that the medical director certification will raise the bar as we get other people to see it as a mark of excellence, and get the NHPCO and other organizations to start pushing for that being present in the majority of hospices.
The dilemma with raising the bar is always not wanting to leave some people behind as you increase the standards. How do you see that being tackled?
Well, I think what we're putting together doesn't leave anybody behind unless they choose to be left behind. It's not requiring training. So they're going to have a certain degree of experience, although we're trying to keep the experience requirements low. But they're going to have to learn some material and sit for an exam. The exam, we've just completed the job analysis portion of the exam. So we surveyed about 700 physicians and that are doing active hospice work, and to find out what their job is. So the exam is going to be very valid for the job of what hospice medical directors are doing. So by all rights, if you can't pass that exam, maybe you shouldn't be a hospice medical director. It's at some point I think we've got to be concerned about what is getting delivered to the patients and their families. And I particularly don't want to be leaving anybody behind, which I think in a sense the board certification process did, because from now at this point, mid-career transitions into hospice, you can't really achieve board certification unless you're going to go back to a fellowship, and that's a rare individual that's going to do that.
Right.
So this gives an opportunity for some type of a certification that hopefully is going to have good credibility in the industry, and hopefully will raise the bar on performance at the bedside.
That's exciting. As you look forward, what kind of skill set do you think our future leaders need?
Well, I mean, we have two distinct constituencies within the academy.
That hasn't changed.
And I hope it doesn't change. But so what I think all of our leaders are going to need, both those that come out of the more academic palliative medicine side of things, and those that are coming out of the workaday hospice world, are going to have to appreciate the diversity of the alternative.
Yes.
And I think there's the key to bringing unity is diversity appreciation. So, as a hospice physician that really doesn't have anything to do with academic or inpatient palliative care, I appreciate what they bring to the table. And although I realize that means they want to hear about different things and I want to hear about it at a meeting, they're important to me. And I need to be important to them as well. And I think the leaders are going to have to continue to bridge that importance, because there's always going to be a certain tension that's pulling against the center.
Yeah.
With those two constituencies. And I think keeping all that together and building the center is going to be a big key to success of the academy. If leadership allows that division to start dividing instead of pulling to center, then we can lose an awful lot of ground as an academy.
Yeah,
And that would be a very bad thing.
certainly for the patients.
Ultimately for the patients, yeah. So I think that that's an important piece. Obviously, as medicine is changing so rapidly, and we don't really even know what it means to us, these changes. It amazes me, I talk to people, so many people in healthcare, and say, well, what do you think the Affordable Care Act is going to mean to your life? And still, years after it's been passed, nobody has any idea what's coming, you know?
Right.
So that level of threat, and I mean, I would think of it as threat. I think most people would rightly recognize that as a threat when you don't know what the future is looking like tomorrow and the uncertainty about tomorrow. So we've got to have people that really are connected in the world. And there's one of the things I appreciate about having the partnership with the academic palliative medicine, because many of my palliative medicine colleagues are much more connected to the political world of medicine than I would be.
Yeah.
And so their ability to know what's going on and see the paths that are safe for us to be on as an industry is going to be really important as well.
Well, those are good words of wisdom. Any final thoughts for the people who assume leadership in your wake?
Well, I think that one of the threats that I see is that as we become bigger, we become more accepted, is that we have a tendency to become more just like what medicine has been.
Yeah.
And I think that what has always distinguished hospice is being something different than what medicine was.
Yeah.
And certainly the bridge into palliative medicine puts us a step closer to what medicine is and was. And I think that we will have to continue to work on distinguishing the differences and not get dragged into and become what medicine is, because I think there's a lot of dysfunction in medicine. And we don't want to become part of the dysfunction. We want to continue to be part of the solution for people with advanced and chronic and terminal illnesses.
You're so right. David, thank you so much.
My pleasure.